Hello, dear connection. Very good morning to all of you. Today, once again, welcome back to our next presentation, lecture 5 on registration and filing of return in respect of goods and service tax. So, we will study here the concept of how how to make the registration under the CGST Act, as well as we are going to study also the concept of how return or filing under the Goods and Service Tax Acts. So it is totally different with the ITR income tax return. We will not going to study in this presentation in this video the concept of ITR in income tax return, but we will be going to study the concept of GSTR goods and service tax return. What is the procedure and how the goods and service tax is going to be filed in the eyes of law, as well as what are the rules and regulations that governs the aspect of registration and for whose types of business the registration is mandatory. So welcome back once again in our lecture 5 in continuation with the previous series. We will be going to discuss all the necessary aspect of registration and filing of goods and service tax. So, I, Dr. Jamal Abdul Nasir Ansari, working as the assistant professor in the Department of Commerce, Aligarh Integral University, will be delivering a lecture 5 on registration and filing of return. So, if you remember well, in our previous classes, in our previous lecture, in our previous videos, I told you we had make a discussion, a healthy discussion on the topic that how goods and service tax came into existence, right? As well as we have also discussed the basic advanced concept of goods and service tax, means how goods and service tax came into existence, what are the basic definition of goods, as well as we have also studied the concept of services, as well as we had also studied in the previous classes the concept of supply of goods, the time of supply, the place of supply, as well as mixed supply. With the help of several examples, we had discussed all the necessary important element over there. So now it is time to arrive at the concluding remarks of this series, means lecture 5 will be based on the registration as well as filing of returns. Means in this lecture, we will be going to discuss the necessary input in the necessary information regarding filing of returns, filing of GSTR goods and service taxation. Means what are the practical applications what we had discussed in our previous classes in our rest lecture 1, lecture 2, lecture 3 and lecture 4. It is all about the theoretical aspects, but in these lectures you will find all kinds of practical aspect, means how goods and service tax, what are the procedure to get your business in the preview of, in the eyes of, in the bracket of goods and service tax, and what are the procedure, what are the rules and regulations laid down in respect of filing of return in for goods and service tax. So without any kinds of further delay, without any kinds of making any kinds of excuses or issues, now it's time to study what is the registration and who are bound to get the business registered, and what are the rules and regulations for the business in respect of the registration, and what are the legal formalities, what are the documentation, and what is the procedure for the registration of goods and service, for the registration of the business under the Goods and Service Tax Act, as well as what are the filing of return, how a business man is going to file their return, GSTR, different GSTR. So we will be going to cover all the necessary aspect in these lectures. So we are going to start first from the registration. What are the section laid down in respect of registration of Goods and Service Tax Act? So the first state, right, application for the goods and service tax registration, who need to get your business registered. So goods and service tax act has clearly defined that who are whose type of business get a mandatory registration in the the eyes of the law for the goods and service tax registration. So the first one is the businesses with aggregate turnover exceeding 40 lakh rupees for goods or 20 lakh rupees for services. So for all kinds of the businesses, whatever they are dealing in the respect of transaction in respect of their economical activities, business activities, if they cross the turnover of rupees 40 lakh for goods and 20 lakh for services, so it required a mandatory registration. So compulsory registration for also there are certain types of business who are not going to fulfill, who are not going to satisfy the condition of the turnover. But having the some types of supply, different types of supply. For example, any business whose turnover does not exceed rupees 40 lakh rupees for goods as well as 20 lakh rupees for services, but need to get themselves registered under the preview of the goods and service tax law. Means compulsory registration for all kinds of businesses, for all kinds of service providers who are having interstate supplier, who are having interstate supply. And I'm damn sure that you have well remember the concept of the interstate supply. Means what does it means? Interstate supply means supply of the goods or services across the boundary of the state. Means from Uttar, if supplier is from Uttar Pradesh and the recipient of the good is from the different state. So in this case, a compulsory registration under the goods and service tax law, so means bearing of goods and service tax GSTIN, goods and service tax identification number is the mandatory. And what is GSTIN number? How it differ with the different how it differ with the different types of state, and what are the consist of GSTIN number, we will be going to study in this lecture. We will let you later on the concept of GSTIN number. So, but as of now, we are discussing the what are the legal formalities in respect of GST registration, as well as who is bound, means legally bound, means mandatory bound to get the business registered themselves in the preview of in the law of goods and service tax. So compulsory registration for all those suppliers who are having a mandatory registration. The first point we should to keep in mind, all kinds of business who are having the mandatory supply required to get themselves registered in the preview of goods and service tax. The first point, compulsory registration for interstate supplier. Second point is about the casual taxable person who is not paying regular taxes, but paying the taxes on different occasions. Similarly, the law has clearly defined what do you mean by the casual taxable person as well as non-resident taxable person. Means those who are not the resident of the India required to get themselves registered compulsory for GSTR. Instead of that, the not crossing the turnover limit 40 lakh for goods as well as 20 lakh for services. The fourth aspect, agents of the supplier. Uh, as we had discussed in the previously, that is the for the agents of the supplier is required mandatory registration. And what does it mean of the agent of the supplier? I told you with the help of examples in our previous lectures 4 and 3. Similarly, e-commerce operators, for them it is mandatory required to get themselves registered to get them self mandatory registration under the GST law, right? For examples, nowadays we can see in the practical life, in the practical aspect, in the real world, number of e-commerce operators are there. For example, Flipkarts, Amazon, Snapdeal, Meso, and many more. So for all of them, it is required get mandatory registration under the Goods and Service Tax Act. So for all kinds of business that we have discussed here, required to get themselves a mandatory registration in respect of what aggregate turnover limit, whatever the limits they are having, right? If they operating in interstate, if any business having a operating interstate supplier, interstate business or casual taxable person. The word casual taxable person has to define in goods and service tax, which we will be going to study later on. Similarly, a non-resident taxable agent of the supplier and e-commerce. Last, the point which are commonly used in practical life, which are having that e-commerce operators. So number of e-commerce operators nowadays get required mandatory to get themselves registered under the Goods and Service Tax Act. Means beginning of GSTIN number is required to get themselves business registered. So e-commerce operator number of operators are there. You can see like Flipkart and many more. Those are having dealing with online businesses. So for all of them, a GST registration is mandatory in this. Instead of they're having aggregate turnover of 40 lakh rupees for goods and just 20 lakh rupees for services. Moving ahead in this direction, as I told you that there are certain business who require to get required to register themselves under the GST law. The first point, what are the next question is arise, what is the procedure to get themselves registered for the business, right, under the GST preview. So for all kinds of businesses, first required to visit the official GST portal, which is what a networking has been developed by the concerned departments required to business to get their business registered. So the first point is what online application on the GST portal using form GST REG 01 means you can get there was two is in order to as per the campaign of digital India, as per the campaign of the make in India. So for instance, as per the in alignment of these digital India, which was campaign run by the Honorable Prime Minister of India, right? Means making everything, every formalities in digitalized way. So here these is also touch means GST portal has also the the elements of the search, also the result of the search for products. So first, every kind, any business, right, any serviceman, any service or any businessman, first required to get themselves registered. They required first to get their to visit the official website of GST portal, means www.gst.gov government.in means India. So any types of, if you want to get self registered right under the GST law, so you require first visit the official website of GST portal, right? For practical application, for knowledge point of view, from knowledge point of view, we will having a different references in this lecture. Later on we will tell you, I will tell you that using that particular references you can get yourself registered for GST as well as for practical gst.gov.in. For knowledge point of view, for study point of view, cbic.gov.in. We will having at the end references too. So first, businessman required to file application form using the GST portal. Second point, verification of detail and generation of ARN. ARN stands for application reference number. After the registration, the businessman will receive different types of OTP and required KYC, required verification using their Aadhaar number, right? So on the registered Aadhaar number, they will with the UAID, they will receive an OTP for after the lot of verification. AARN number, application reference number, will be generated. So after that, approval or the rejection by the proper officer within seven working days. So either these applications must be registered, must be accepted or rejected. So the concerned officer, the concerned dealing person within 7 days will approve or reject after a lot of verification from the documentation, right, from the concerned businessman. So next is on approval goods and service tax number. The businessman will receive the businesses will receive GSTIN number, which consists of a number which is what a alphanumeric number. I will tell you here later on this lecture in this lecture that how it look like and what are the meanings of GSTIN number, and every state are having their different GSTIN number. So GST portal will be going to provided GSTIN number, goods and service tax identification number, and the certificate are issued in the form of GST REG06. So after the successful registration, so after the successful registration of goods and service tax, right? So on approval, the concerns department will issue a GSTIN number, goods and service tax identification number, and the certificate are issued in the form of GST REG06. So from practical point of view, I will show you here in this lecture how it look like GST REG06, and how GST, how what are the how GSTIN look like and what the numbers consist, right? It is alphanumeric, and how what are the meaning of these various types of numbers. So in this lecture you will going to study the GSTIN number in detail, as well as from the practical point of view I will also show you GST REG06. So this is what the procedure for the registration. If any businessman want to get themselves registered in the GST preview, so required a proper documentation, proper channels, right? So and everything is what digitalized. So no need to move here and there for different for tough for different complication, right? So GSTIN number, goods and service tax, totally it is transparent, totally it is a digitalized. Every businessman can see what are the tax filing history of different businesses, right, using GSTIN number. So from practical point of view, at the end of this lecture we will be having a details practical on GST, goods and service tax, GST goods and service tax. Means any common man can see the filing history of goods and service, the filing history of GSTR of any businessman of any services. So moving ahead in this direction, the first procedure for registration step, there are total 18, 19, 17 steps are there to get themselves registered. So here a detailed step has been mentioned because of the lackness of the space. I am unable to paste here some kinds of screenshot, but at the end of this lecture I will show you that using the some hyperlink, any business, anyone across the world can access the official website of GST and can see the history, can see the details of any businessman using GSTIN number. So at the end we find, so here detailed procedure is mentioned here. The first point, the first step is to what, go to GST portal. The second is to generate a TRN by entering the following details in part A and completing OTP validation. As I told you just right now, once you are going to visit this GST portal, so you will be receiving different types of OTP for validation, for e-verification. So the third step is what, OTP verification and TRN generation, means temporary reference number. TRN stands for temporary reference number. After this temporary, the next stage, step 4 is what, TRN generated. Next step 5 talk about the login with TRN, and step 6 talk about the OTP verification. Step 7 talk about the checking application status. Step 8 talk about the submit business information. Step 9 talk about the submit promoter information. Means details of business, details of the promoter who are going to get themselves registered, required their Aadhaar card, required their PAN card, required their POP, principal place of business, and many more document is required for the GST registration. And after a successful filing of the application, the concerned officer will be going to examine the physically all the documentary evidences as well as the Physical verification of POP, principal place of business, means where the businessman is going to start the business. What are the different types of signboard, name plates, bills, and many more. Then after lot of, if all kinds of get successfully verified, so GST in number, GST IN number, as well as GST registration certificate will be issued within the definite period of time as laid down in the GST law. So the next step 10 talk about submit authorized signatory information. Step 11 talk about inter principals place of business details. Step 12 talk about the submit details. Step 12 talk about the submit details of goods as well as services along with HSN number or ACC. HSN stands for Harmonized System of Nomenclature, and SAC stand for some kinds of services, and some like that. We will having a details the lecture on this HSN and SAC after this. So step 13 talk about details of the bank account. Step 14 talk about state specific information, means Uttar Pradesh, Maharashtra, and many more. Then after step 15 talk about Aadhaar authentication. Step 16 talk about the verification of the approval. Step 17 talk about ARN generate, means a application reference number. So once after a lot of successful step by step procedures, once it is successful, so at the end the business will get AARI numbers, which required for the further verification from the concerned officers of the CBIC, Central Board of Indirect Taxes and Custom Duty. So they will get themselves verified all the documentary evidences. Then, if they found that all the provided documentary evidences are genuine, reliable, then they will issue GST IN number as well as registration certificate. So, from a law point of view, as I just right now told you that what are the different sections laid down in respect of registration for the goods and service. So section 22 of the GST Act 2017 talk about the personal liable for registration. Section 23 of GST law, CGST law, CGST Act 2017 talk about person not liable for registration. Section 24 talk about compulsory registration in certain cases. As I told you just right now, if any businessman making interstate supply required to get themselves registered. Section 25 talk about the procedure for the registration. Section 26 talk about deemed registration. 27 talk about special provision related to casual taxable person and non-resident taxable person. 28 talk about amendment of the registration, sometime required, after successful business completion, after successful business running. So businessman sometimes required to change the POP, principal place of business, to get the benefits, to get the tax benefit, to get the economical benefits. So businessman planning to shift their business from one state to another state, so at that time they required to you know go through the GST Act, say GST Act 2017, what are the amendment of the registration. Similarly, Section 29 talk about the cancellation or the suspension of the registration. Section 30 talk about the revocation of the cancellation of the registration. So in these in the upcoming in alignment in line with these registration of section 2, now have a detailed discussion what the section 22 talk about, means who are the personal liable for registration. As I told you, individual registered under the pre-GST law, means excise duty, VAT, service tax act, means all kinds of business who are having registration pre-GST, means before the introduction of goods and service tax, means goods and service tax came into existence in 2017. So before that, there are a number of businessmen or there are a number of businesses already doing the business. So for all kinds of businesses, they require to get themselves registered. means this was the pre-GST. So they are legally bound to get themselves registered as per section 22 of CGST Act 2017, means individual registered under the pre-GST law. So once again required to get themselves registered. Businessman with turnover above threshold limit of 40 lakh and 20 lakh or 10 lakh rupees as the case may be. So see GST, Central Goods and Service Act, Central Goods and Service Tax 2017 further clarified that in certain state means state of northeast, we having details means what are the different state, right, which are having not the threshold limit of 40 lakh or 20 lakh, but they are having the limit of 10 lakh and something like that. So we will covering aspect just right now. Similarly, a casual taxable CTP as well as NRTP, non-registered taxable person, and those paying taxes under the reverse charge mechanism. What is RCM? I told you, if you remember well, that those who are paying the taxes under the RCM required to get themselves registered under the GST. Under the RCM, as I told you, the supplier not going to make the payment of GST to the government, but the recipient of the goods going to make the payment of GST to the government, means whatever state government or central government. The next point, person who supply via an e-commerce aggregator. As I've told you, every e-commerce aggregator, person supplying online information and database access or retrieval services from place outside India to a person in India other than a registered taxable person. For instance, for the research domain for the academia, there are different types of database supplying information to different individual in India from the outside India. For example, Scopus for the research purposes, Web of Science for the research purposes, and many more databases are there. So all required to get themselves registered as per section 22. My mandatory registration is required from website. Section 23 further talk about person not liable for registration, means any person engaged exclusively in the business of supplying goods or services or both that are not liable, means wholly exempted from the tax, means if any businessman dealing with that type of goods, that goods which not fall under the preview of under the umbrella of GST law, means a person making doing the trading or buying and selling or manufacturing of alcoholic beverage or petroleum products. So these all are, so such type of businesses does not require to get themselves registered at per section 23 of CGST. Why? Because these goods is totally exempt from the GST, right? And an agriculturist to the extent of the supply of produce out of the cultivation of the land, means a farmer does not require to get themselves registered under the GST law. Why? Because this product, agriculture product, is also out of the preview, out of the umbrella of GST Act. So section 23 clarified that these are the person who not required to get themselves registered under the GST Act. Further, 2020 section 24 talk about the person compulsory registration in certain cases. For examples, a person making any interstate taxable supply, casual taxable making taxable supply, person who are required to pay tax under the reverse charge. I already told you, person who are required to pay tax under subsection 5 of section 9. A non-resident taxable person making taxable supply, a person who are required to deduct on tax under the section 15 whether or not separately registered under this act, a person who makes taxable supply of goods or services or both on behalf of other taxable person whether as an agent or otherwise, or input service distributor whether or not separately registered under the GST under this act. And next, person who supply goods or service or both other than the supply specified under subsection 5 of section 9 through such electronic commerce operator who required to collect tax at Act sources under Section 52, and every electronic commerce operator who required to collect tax at source under Section 52 means e-commerce operator like Flipkart, Amazon, Snapdeal, Meso, and many more are e-commerce nowadays. Next section, uh, uh, every person supplying online information and database access to tribal and will as such other person or class of the person as may be notified by the government on the recommendation of this council. So these section 20 talk about the compulsory registration, right? So such type of the business is required to make a compulsory registration under the Goods and Service Tax Act, Section 24 is specified. Similarly, Section 25 just laid down the details guideline in respect of what are the procedure for the registration. As I told you in my beginning lecture that every person who is liable to register under the Section 22 Section 24 shall apply the registration in every such state or the union territory in which he is so liable within 30 30 days. So just right now I told you that every businessman is required to get themselves registered, right? Who are going to make a registration under Section 22 and 24, right? And such type of business is required every state and or union territory, for example, Pondicherry and Damanti or many more, whatever the duties are there, right? So, in all such duty, in all such state, businessman is required to get themselves registered if they are having such kinds of procedures, right? Within 30 days from the date on which he becomes liable to registration, in such manner and subject to such condition as may be prescribed. So a person seeking registration under this act shall be granted a single registration in the state or union territory. Means a business, one type of business they will get, in one state they will bearing a one GSTIN number. If a business having different dealing in different states, so in all states they required to get themselves registered because every state are having their GSTIN number different with the same state. For example, Uttar Pradesh having different GSTIN means the first two words, the first two digit differ with the state of the Haryana, different state of the Maharashtra, differ with the state of the Bihar and Jharkhand and many more. So how is this GST look like, GSTIN look like? We will be covering these aspects GSTIN in this lecture. So a person through not liable to register under Section 22 or Section 24 may get himself registered voluntary, and all the provision of these act are as applicable to registered person shall apply to such person. Means if any businessman don't want to get themselves registered compulsory, means they're not going to make their registration, they want to get themselves, means they want GSTIN voluntary, so they can go. GSTIN, goods and service fee GST, welcome all such type of businesses who are having the voluntary registration. So Section 25 talk about the procedure for the registration. As I told you already, there are certain cases which are supposed to be not registered but deemed registration as per Section 26. The grant of the registration or unique identity number under the GST Act or the Union Territory Goods and SGST or UTGST shall be deemed to be grant of registration or the unique identification number under these acts subject to the condition that the application for the registration or the unique identification number has not been rejected under this act within the specified in the subsection 10 of section 25. So all such types of businesses is supposed to be deemed registration under section 26. Moving ahead, as I told you, if any businesses want to make certain types of amendment in the registration, so GST has also Goods and Service Tax Act law has also given a detailed clear cut guidelines, detailed clear cut procedure that how you want to how to make the amendment in the registration. So every registered person and a person to whom a unique identification number has been assigned shall inform the proper officer of any changes in the information furnished at the time of the registration or subsequent thereto in such form and manners and within such period as may be prescribed. So at the time of the application and any businessman want to make any kinds of the changes, so they require to inform the concerned officer within the prescribed time, within the prescribed format as led by the GST Act. The proper officer may, on the basis of the information furnished under subsection 1 or as assigned by him, approve or reject the amendments in the registration, particulars in such manners and within such period as may be prescribed. Though the concerned officer, after the verification, they will be going to make the necessary approval or the going to reject the information if satisfying the condition. Section 29 talk about the cancellation or the suspension of the registration. The proper officer may either on his own motion or on an application filed by the registered person or by his legal heir in case of death of person cancel the registration in such manners and within the specific period as may be prescribed having the regard to the circumstances. So the businesses have been discontinued. The first point, transferred fully for any reason, including the death of the proprietors or amalgamated with the other legal entity, demerger or otherwise disposed. So the GST IN number will be going to cancel by the concerned officer because Section 29, Section 29 talk about the cancellation or suspension of the registration. So any business has been discontinued or transferred or merged or demerged or whatever the case may be amalgamated. So if anything or any act happens, so it is going to be what cancelled. GST number registration will be cancelled. Is there any changes in the constitution of the business? It is also going to lead toward the cancellation of the GST registration. The proper officer may cancel the registration of a person from such date, including any retrospective date as he may be deemed fit where. The cancellation of the registration under this section shall not affect the liability of the person to pay taxes and other dues under this act. So Section 29 finally confirmed that in certain circumstances the concerned officer have the power to get the businessman registration cancelled if the same businessman going to make any kinds of ultra wire to the rules and regulations or discontinue the business, the merger or acquisition merger and something like that. Section 30 talk about the revocation of the cancellation of the registration. Subject to such condition as may be prescribed, any registered person whose registration is cancelled by the proper officer on his motion may apply to such officer for revocation of the cancellation of the registration in the prescribed manners within 30 days from the date of the service of the cancellation order. So if if the concerned officer may reject or cancel the such types of registration. Those person who are going to register themselves for the GST Act, right? So they can apply, they can appeal to the concerned officer for fresh application. So amendment and cancellation. I told you that amendment of the registration form required registration form 14 means filed when changes in business name, address, or business details. So required such kinds of changes. So at that time, amendment section form 14 have to fill mandatory. Addition, deletion of the business place or the partner. Any business is going to introduce or any business are going to introduce. So in these cases of in these such kinds of cases, within 15 days of such changes required to make a amendment and business is required to contact to the concerned person, concerned officer. So cancellation of the registration, as I told you, voluntary. If any businessman want to get themselves, they want to cancel their registry, their GST IN number, so they can go and they can approach the concerned person that I want to cancel my business, I want to cancel my GST IN number, I want to discontinue my business. So they have to follow the proper documentation, proper formalities. So they can go for the tax by tax officers means when business is discontinued, transfer are no longer required to be registered. So by tax officer for non-filing of GST more than 6 months. So in these cases, you are going to breach the contract, going to ultra wide of the rules and regulations. In such circumstances, if any businessman not filing the GST goods and service tax identification, goods and service tax return GST R123 whatever maybe. So by default, more than 6 months, if any businessman not filing GSTR, so going to discontinue, going to cancel the registration. Means GSTIN number will be going to cancel. Violation of GST provision as I already told you. So application inform registration 16 and officers issue show cause notice in registration 17 and passes order in registration 19 for the cancellation of GSTIN number. Section 27 I told you talk about the casual taxable and non taxable person. The certificate of the registration issued to a casual taxable person or a non-taxable person shall be valid for the period of specified in the application for the registration or 90 days from the date of registration, whichever early, and such person shall make the taxable supply only after the issuance of the certificate of the registration. So as I told you that for the registration of goods and service tax. So what about the finding of GSTR? It means GSTR 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different types of. So for GSTR 1 description, I have told you the due date. For details of outward supplier means sales. So for them, if any businessman making the sales, so for them GSTR 1 is required. 11th of the next month means, for example, this is what the November is going on. So the next month will be the December. So 11th of December will be required to due date of GSTR. GSTR 3 we talk about the summary return for the payment of the taxes 20th of the next month. 6 GSTR 9 talk about the annual return 31st December of the next financial year. GSTR 9 talk about the reconciliation statement for audit. 6 the due date for GSTR 9C, which is the 31st December of the next financial year. There are number of also returns of their GSTR 2A, 2B, populated or inward supply purchase. GSTR 4 talk about the for composition taxable taxpayer. GSTR 10 talk about the final return on cancellation. So we will be covering all the necessary aspect in the coming lectures. So GSTR 1 I told you outward supply. GSTR 3 talk about the monthly summary, right? So there are different GSTR, the sales of taxable monthly of 11th of GSTR 1, GSTR 3, GSTR 4, GSTR 5, GSTR 5A, GSTR 6, GSTR 7, GSTR 8, return to be filed by the e-commerce operator. For example, monthly means 10th of the next month means there are a number of e-commerce are there. For example, Flipkart, Amazon, Meso. They all are required to get GSTR 8, right? Filed of the next 10th of every month. So for the month of this November, right? So 10th of December, all kinds of e-commerce operator required to file their GSTR. Right? So moving ahead in this direction, there are payment challan, which is also matter of the discussion in goods and service tax. So GST payment is the process by which businesses and taxpayers deposit their tax liability to the government in electronic cash register. So PMT6 about the tax payment through cash, credit or set off, and cash. It may be in cash, it may be in credit, it may be in liability. So after these this is done after the offsetting the input tax rate and generating a GST or challan. So in effect, it ensured tax compliance and timely remittance of GST dues. So as I told you that different tax person require different GSTR. So if a supplier supplying goods and services to different parties across the world, across the India, and in India consists of different state. So it take lot of time, like lot of procedure, right? Different the supplier, the recipient, right? Means if their recipient is not the final customer, means the retailer, so they will make ITC. They are going to claim the ITC, and after these, they are all required to file GSTR from time to time on every month on monthly basis. So this practice continues in every month. So next agenda of the discussion is that who should pay GST? A registered person and service provider under the GST regime required to pay the GST. An importer and exporter as also applicable to make the payment of GST. The taxpayer who fall under the prescribed turnover or threshold limit, as I told you, that every businessman uh, whose turnover exceed 20 lakh, 40 lakhs, and 10 lakh, and taxpayer with nil GST returns may not need to make any payment if there is no tax liability. It means the taxpayer who are not supplying GST GST exempted goods, so does not require to make any kinds of payments. So what is the procedure? The first is what process to make the GST payment. Access your tax liability after adjusting input tax credit (ITC). I have already told you the concept of input tax credit. So every business required to get themselves registered and using that portal, the same portal GST www.gst.gov.in. So they required to file login, and after the login they require to adjust the ITC and start paying the taxes. Determine if additional cash is required in the electronic cash register. The next is generate a GST challan either before or after logging into the GST portal or while filing GST R3B. Choose an online or offline mode. GST, it is a very good thing for that. It is very good news that the GST provide both kinds of mode, means offline as well as online of the payment by selecting the appropriate option in the challan. Complete the payment following steps provided by the net banking, debit, credit cards, UPI, or offline modes like OTC, NEFT, RTGS, and UPI, and many more, IMPS. Once the payment made, the electronic cash ledger is updated, and you may track the transaction via GST portal. So there are certain limit in respect of these GST input credit information rules. So what are the when a business is going to claim the ITC, what are the eligibility input tax for the ITC input tax credit? Goods and service used for the business purpose only, means any goods or services using for other than business is not going to claim GSTI, ITC, the concept of input tax credit. Valid GST invoices with the proper details, means invoices, documentary invoices should be there in order to claim ITC. Goods received or service availed. Goods means the goods as well as service must be availed. If it is still to be availed, you can't claim the phenomena, you can't claim the ITC, right? So for eligibility, there are certain eligibility, means not used for exempt supply, GST return filed and tax paid by the supplier. If all kinds of eligibility are fulfilled, so a business can claim ITC. Told you that common credit in terms of formula wise have also been mentioned. So the GST input tax credit information and rule has been mentioned. Similarly, there are certain time limit has also been prescribed for the input tax credit. So what are the time limits? ITC can be claimed within 2 years from the invoice date. So if a invoice has been issued today, so from the date, means today means 18 November 2025. So from that date right till 22 years, ITC can be claimed, and ITC must be claimed in the return for the month in which invoice is raised. ITC on reverse charge can be claimed immediately, and ITC on capital goods can be claimed over the multiple years. So this all about the claiming of the eligibility of ITC. So I hope that the concept of goods and service tax registration, its amendment, compulsory registration, turnover, and different phenomena which is are in respect of this registration is now clear to you. The next the point of the discussion will be that there are different notes are used in GST, IN, goods and service tax, law. For example, debit note, credit note, and many more notes are used. So, debit note, what is debit note? It is also known as a debit memo. Is a document used to notify the buyer about a debt obligation. It's common in business to business dealing where goods or services are supplied on credit before an official invoice is issued. If a purchaser decrease in the value invoice value and issue a note to the subseller, so it will be known as the debit note. Similarly, the debit note is decrease in invoice value, while in the credit note it does not. So a credit note subsequently talk about it work under the other way around. It notifies the buyer that the credit has been applied to their account, and you will be encounter these when a seller need to adjust an invoice, cancel part of it, or acknowledge return goods. The credit note, also called credit memos, offer flexibility in managing return and adjustment without issuing refunds. So there are the credit. These all about the credit notes and debit notes. So now the next question is, right, what are the difference between credit notes and debit notes? So there are different bases to make the difference between debit note as well as credit note. So from the first base will be who issue. So the debit note issued by the buyer of the goods issue, while the credit note is issued by the seller. So from the meaning point of view, I have already told you that what does it mean of what is the meaning of debit note and what is the meaning of the credit note. I already told you, and can be issued. It can be issued only in the event of the credit, while credit note can be issued only in the event of the credit sales. While debit note is issued in the case of the credit purchase from the buyer's perspective. So it is a link in the blue lines. It is so used in the blue ink, while credit note is linked ink with the red ink. So I hope that the difference between debit note and the credit note is now clear to all of you. Moving ahead in this direction, eBay electronic e-way bill. What this mean and why it have significant impact in the GST in numbers. Try to understand. Under the GST, an electronic way bill is required for movement of goods. A registered person cannot transport goods in vehicle whose value exceeds 50,000 single invoice bill delivery challan without an e-way bill means electronic way. E means electronic way bill that is generated on e-way bill gst.e.gov.in. If any businessman supplying goods or services exceeding 50 lakh rupees, so it can't issue until and unless a e-way bill has been generated using e-way bill gst.gov.in. In e-way bill can also be generated or cancelled through SMS or Android apps and by site to site integrating through API. I already told you, right? It's totally transparent. So there are certain procedure for e-way bill process have been mentioned. That is there a movement of goods? No, e-way bill not necessary. If yes, are the goods exempted? No. Interstate output of goods? When, who, what? So detailed picture, this detailed picture tell about the in respect of e-way bill process. So moving ahead in this direction, I told you the concept of the tax planning here will have also matter of the discussion. Means navigate the complexities of GST, tax planning, and cross charging. So it learns effectively strategies for goods procurement, planning, maximizing input tax credit, and ensuring the seamless cross charging in multi location entities. So GST goods and services have further clarified that in order to get a maximum benefit of ITC, right, as well as the procurement of the various types of raw material for manufacturing of goods as well as services. So, crucial aspect of GST for optimum benefits. So tax planning under GST involves strategic and arranging business and financial affairs to the legally minimize tax liability while ensuring full compliance with the law. It leverages a specific provision within the GST frameworks, such as optimizing input ITC and choosing the appropriate registration schemes to maximize saving and improve the cash flow. So tax planning GST have also very important aspect of GST. So it optimize business operation to minimize GST legally. Focus on maximizing ITC, correct classification, proper compliances. Similarly, the main motive or objective of tax planning is reduce GST burden legally, ensure timely compliance, optimize ITC, improve cash flow. So these all are the various objectives of tax planning. So registration and business structure, they told you classification and rate of planning, evaluating planning, ITC planning, in time supply and place of supply, which have already told you in very detailed manner in the previous discussion. So, for the tax planning registration, choosing the regular versus composite scheme. If any business want to get themselves registered for the composite scheme or regular, so they have first required to choose separate registration for different types of branches. Similarly, using input service distributor. So, what are the benefits of the tax planning? Lower tax burden, first, improve working capital, reduce digitalization risk, and better compliance. So, these are the various benefits for the tax. So, now it is time to conclude all what we have discussed just right now. So, these there are two very and good references, very ideal references given for practical point of view as well as for knowledge point of view. I already told you in the beginning at the time of the I starting of this lecture 1, lecture 2, lecture 3, lecture 4 and lecture 5. This is a lecture series, right? So today now it is the time to conclude all the things, right? So the governments at the time of introduction of GST Act, right, clarify everything, digitalize every single definition under the Goods and Service Tax Act has been clearly defined well. So from the practice point of view, the researcher, the student, the audience, any concerned person use the provided link means www.gst.gov, right? For the practice point of view means using the GSTIN number, they can use GSTIN number of any businessman. They can see the details, the legal name of the entity, the legal aspect of every aspect, tax filing history, the business's name, and all these things for the businessman. This is the first reference used for the practical point of view. The next provided reference www.cbic.gov.in used for the study point of view. Over there, you can get all the necessary study material in respect of GST law as well as custom law. So these are the two major ideal differences have been provided for the further study purposes. So I hope that you have enjoyed this lecture very well. So now it is time for question and answers, and for any kinds of confusion, for any kinds of conflicts, for any kinds of disagreement. So what we had discussed the concept of registration of GST, as well as we had also discussed the concept of how to file the GSTR, what is the meaning of I guess GSTR. So for any kinds of questions, for any kinds of disagreement, for any kinds of things, you may contact to us on the given number for any kinds of details information in respect of GSTIN numbers. So I hope that you have enjoyed very well today. So now it is the last but not least, it is time to say thanks to the audiences for your patience in hearing, for bearing us patiently, right? So I'm also very thanks to the Center for e-learning distance and e-learning of Integral University for providing me a chance to express my views on the said topic. I'm also thankful to the Integral University for providing me opportunities, employment opportunities. I'm also thankful, to the audience of this video for patience listening, for patience bearing, for the times. So thank you so much. Wish you a happy life. Wish you a happy day. And for any kinds of questions, any kinds of argument, you may contact to me or and on the given number. So at the last, thank you so much for watching this video. Thank you.